both in session. So if you could please call the roll.
Do, certainly. Senator Hancock, Senator Liu, Senator Fuller, Assemblymember Buchanan, Assemblymember Hagman, Assemblymember Nazarian, Esteban Almanza,
Here.
Jeannie Oropeza,
Here.
Cesar Diaz,
Here.
Irena Ortega.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And for the members of the public, what we're going to do is kind of skip around on the agenda and do all of the action items first. Again, so we maintain our quorum for taking an action. So we are going to start with the minutes under tab 2. And if anyone has any comments or corrections to the minutes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the minutes? Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you. Yes, sorry. Let me.
Just to clarify that the minutes are, there are 2 minutes, March 26 and April 7.
Okay, so I assume the motion was for both sets of minutes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Let the record reflect that both sets of minutes were approved. The next action item would be under tab 7, correct? Oh, consent, sorry. See, I think I'm being organized here. Tab 4, the consent agenda.
And with that, if there's not a problem, I'd like to recommend that we approve the consent agenda along with action items 10 and 11.
Okay. Any objection to adding items 10 and 11 to the consent agenda? Second. Are there any comments on the consent agenda and items 10 and 11 as stated in the agenda from the public? Seeing none, is there, we have a motion and a second? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The consent agenda and items 10 and 11 are approved. And let's see, am I correct that we're ready to move to item 7? Yes. This is the Merced County appeal. Barbara. Yes.
So this appeal for Merced County Office of Education, the COE is requesting to maintain its current funding application and apportionment using a new DSA application approval, which was received on March 11, 2014. This is a 3-classroom project with therapy area for special day class students that began the design process back in 2006. The COE qualifies for financial hardship assistance, and the project was approved with financial hardship funds for the entire local matching share. The original DSA application for this project was approved in June 2007, and the COE received an unfunded approval from the board in January 2010. They did submit for priority funding in August 2010, but there was insufficient cash to provide the project with an apportionment. Prior to the expiration of the original DSA approval, the COE had the opportunity to submit for an additional 3 priority funding rounds where cash would have reached their project, but they chose not to at that time. And then the original DSA approval expired on June 28, 2012, after exhausting all extensions allowed by law.
Go ahead.
Okay. So the staff position on this appeal is that once the DSA approval expires, the COE no longer has an approved application for funding. And at this point, I'd like to briefly explain some of the terminology that's been used throughout this item. In this item, we speak generally about a new set of plans requiring a new DSA approval and therefore becoming a new project. And we'd like to clarify that we are not speaking about any changes to the plans or new plan pages that may be submitted to DSA as part of the original DSA application and approved under the original DSA application number. The DSA plan approval process does have procedures in place to allow non-material changes to the original scope of work, both during the bid and construction phases of a project. And these changes are commonly referred to as revisions, addenda, and change orders. These changes also require DSA approval and may be considered by some to be new plans. However, that's not the process that OPSC is speaking to in this item. Our concern is related to those projects for which DSA requires a new application submittal, as is the case for Merced. And in the past, when a district or COE needed to submit a new application for approval to DSA, the funding application would be withdrawn and resubmitted for funding at a later date. And by submitting a new application for funding, it would maintain the valid certifications on the application for funding. It also ensured that the application remained an approved application as defined by regulations. And it maintained equity in the funding process, and that the application is processed when it was ready for funding and wouldn't lead to any sort of line jumping situation. The challenge now is that there is no bond authority remaining in the new construction program. So if Merced were to withdraw and resubmit a new application, it would have to be placed on the acknowledged list. And the COE has stated in their appeal documents that the budget issues and staffing changes at the district have prevented this project from moving forward throughout the years. They've also stated that any changes approved by the DSA as part of their new application submittal are solely to comply with the new building code and do not affect the request for funding or the scope of the project. If this appeal is not approved, the COE will be unable to submit a fund release for the apportionment that they received on April 7th, and this would result in a second occurrence of non-participation in priority funding for this project. And if there is a second occurrence, this apportionment would be rescinded as of July 7th, 2014, and the bond authority would be made available for another project that's currently waiting on the unfunded list. And with that, I'd be happy to address any questions.
Okay. Are there any questions from the members? Witnesses here in support of the appeal?
Well, thank you for allowing Merced County to, or for the board to listen to the appeal for the Merced County project. I'm Steve Gomes. I'm the Merced County Superintendent of Schools. I've been in that position in the last 4 years. And just for your information, this is my 42nd year in education as a teacher, school administrator, site administrator, and now county superintendent. You know, as a school superintendent, I fully understand the importance of regulation. I don't know why I'm so nervous, but and you're not a board of parents, but I fully understand the importance of regulation and policy compliance, and yet sometimes you know we need to draw from a broader perspective to make decisions. I know I do that all the time. Just so that you know, Merced County is you know, second from the bottom in per capita income in California, and we currently are. And this facility is for some of our most vulnerable students and most medically fragile. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of that first. But I think that since my Assembly member is here, I'd like to defer to him for now.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, members of the State Allocation Board. My name is Assemblyman Adam Gray, and I represent both Merced and Stanislaus County. In Merced County, the topic of conversation today. And I'm here today to plea for the severely disabled students in my district that this particular project would serve. These are students who are isolated in their location, have long commutes currently, and have a school that is 40 years old. Back in 2010, this board approved priority funding for a new facility, the Joseph Stephanie Elementary School for these special needs kids. This new school will cut the commute times, will have great benefit, and will fully integrate these special needs students with children their own age. At the time, the construction was delayed as the state was broke. I think many of us are all too familiar with that situation. And between then and now, mistakes were made. Human errors were made. But the project and its benefits are the same today that they would have been in 2010 when it was approved. This is a district, those of you sitting up here who are my colleagues know that I've been a voice for my district in the sense of we've been at the epicenter of the housing crisis. We've been one of the most impoverished regions, not in the state, but in the country. So many struggles and so many needs, and today we have an opportunity to put some money, put a school, provide for some students who are in desperate need in a part of the country that desperately needs it. So I would ask for your support in this appeal before you this afternoon.
Thank you, Assemblyman Gray. I would just like to say again that this project is for some of our most vulnerable and medically fragile students, and to that point, I couldn't bring them with me, but I do have a couple pictures I'd like to share with you. This is Trent. He's 16 years old. He's 16 years old and attends the medical fragile class, as I said. He can't speak, but he's very expressive in his smile and his frown. If he disagrees with something that you have to say to him, he can make his emotions known. And he is one of them that travels to our Shelby School, which is a little more isolated for students like this. This project would keep them on the Stephanie School, where they could be mainstreamed, and not only benefiting them, but also benefiting the students at that school as well. This is Isaac, and Isaac is 9 years old. He suffers from and I have to read, a Meyer-Gorlin syndrome, which is a form of dwarfism. The picture makes him look a little bigger than he is. He's probably going to really like this picture when I'm done with it. But he is 9 years old, weighs 17 pounds. He's about as tall as his table. And just a wonderful kid, and is always happy, always joking around. So those are the kids that we're talking about. And, you know, sometimes, and I would think that this project is shovel ready. We just got the bids back. We're on budget with that. We're ready to go. And in fact, if this appeal is granted, we could, and funding approved, we could build it in 7 months, and these kids would be ready to go, and they would spend 40 hours less a month on the bus each month. So today I'm just asking you to maybe look at it from a greater perspective, and look at it not only from maybe how these students might look at it, but their parents as well. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm, what the county superintendent of schools has to deal with is a lot of issues. And these kids come and go through their school and go out. What I'm trying to figure out is the timing on this, okay? 2006, the district applied and was approved, and it was design monies. Actually, before then, it actually got approved for concept, but 2006, you got design monies to go out and build. 2010, you were approved on the funded list. In 2013, for those 3 or 4 years, you didn't even apply for any of the dollars. So understand those kids were your priority. How come the district didn't move forward in those 3 years?
Well, part of that, well, let me just talk about 2013, because that really does get complicated. But we took over. During that time, there were 5 existing projects. Now we're a small county by most measures, and that administration was under the impression that they did not qualify for funding. And when the new administration took over and sorted through the project, sorted through all the paperwork that was left behind, that's when discovered that we did have eligibility. So the county office discovered the information and given to us, and that discovered that what we thought to be the lack of eligibility was inaccurate, and immediately submitted a prior in funding certification May of 2013, and the project was apportioned in July of 2013. We were told that the plans had expired at DSA, and immediately resubmitted our DSA plans and attempted to get our same DSA number. We're here today to keep our place in line, and then when the plans were submitted, there were 2 things changed, and therefore, because the expiration or the last extension had run out, we then got a new DSA number, and the new DSA number then took us off the list.
And,
So-
and I'm trying to drill down is why was, after 2 extensions and 100% funded by the states, this is not money out of your pocket or resources that you had to match up or anything like that, how come we couldn't get this going in the extensions?
You know, I'd like to ask my Director of Facilities, who is here, Paul. Paul, would you address the question in 2006, please? Let me introduce Paul Speed, current Director of Facilities. He was not there in 2006. He was, you started in?
2012.
Yeah.
The project, I believe we had a number of projects going at the time, and so the first opportunity that we had to be able to man the project was in 2010. That's when we jumped into the priority funding round. There were no funds available at the time. In between 2010 and 2013, there was just a number of turnovers in our organization. We had a new superintendent. We've had 2 assistant superintendents of business services. We've gone through 3 positions in my position, and so there was nobody there to man the project or to follow through with applying for the priority and funding rounds.
But you had multiple other projects that you did complete, or you were going through?
We had a planner on staff who saw those projects finish out, but we didn't have anybody there to start the new project.
And that was also in the same time period?
All in the same time period.
So you finished 3 out of the 4 projects that you applied for? Is that correct? Or?
Yes.
Okay, so this probably wasn't as high as priority as the other 3 then, is what you're telling me.
Those projects, I believe, had started before this one was even approved.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Henry.
I think that we've discussed this before, and it's a difficult situation. I just have to say that members of the Senate, we are not allowed to add on to bills later. So we have a brief hiatus when we can come up here. I actually feel a great deal of sympathy and understand why the convoluted process sometimes does people in. So for the sake of discussion, I would move that we grant the appeal and let them submit a new set of plans.
Go ahead.
I do have a question because you've been superintendent for 4 years, you said in your opening remarks.
3.5.
3.5. And it sounds to me like, and you've had other projects that have been state funded, so it's not where you're not familiar with the program or you don't know how to participate in the program, correct?
Correct.
So, I mean, I knew as a school board member that my DSA plans were only valid for a certain amount of time. I mean, then you were allowed extensions, but after that you had to reapply to DSA. So I assume if you've been in education 42 years and you've had other projects, you're aware of that as well, correct?
Well, a large number of those 42 years was a teacher, and so but
You're not aware, you are aware, you're not aware that DSA plans aren't valid forever. You have to.
Correct.
Okay, so you are aware of that, and this isn't a situation where you couldn't sell bonds or whatever because it's a financial hardship program where the state is covering 100% of the cost. So what it is a matter of, submitting an application to the state so you can be funded, correct?
that's correct.
And you had
county
3 other
schools can't float
projects. So
bonds.
where I struggle is when we've had other projects in this situation, because I struggle between my heart and the fairness side of me. When we've had other districts in this situation, we haven't allowed them to jump the list, or we haven't allowed them to substitute one project for another. And so and you have other projects that are in line, hoping that some fall off so that they can get in line for money. So I would like to ask staff do we have other situations where we have granted these kinds of exceptions, or are we starting a precedent here?
No, we actually haven't permitted.
Right. I mean, ever since I've been on the board, if you have a new project, we have not allowed that kind of line jumping, and it's bewildering to me because everyone who comes here with an appeal, almost everyone, we had a change in turnover in staff, so it's not our fault. But virtually everyone has that story to tell, but you have a project that has been in the hopper since 2006, that's had approvals, that has been 100% funded, where all you had to do was submit the application for funding. And you failed to do that, and so I have a hard time making an exception when we've never done that historically, and every time we do make these exceptions, we create precedents going forward.
Thank you. Any other comment? There's a motion? Yes. Yes. Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Can I have,
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, can I
Yes,
have
you have someone behind you
one
who
more
would like
person?
to speak also.
Susan Stewart, representing the Merced County Office of Education. And I just want to comment on the precedent-setting nature of this. The precedent would be only cover those projects on the true unfunded list, because that's the last set of projects that will be funded under this bond. Any other projects funded after that will be under a new bond, totally new rules and regulations.
For the most part, we've kept the same rules from bond to bond.
Right, but there will be no, but if in fact we're looking at this one unfunded list, there will be, we looked at the list very carefully, and we were having a difficult time finding any district that would have the same situation. The 4 projects that had expired plans, we checked with those districts. One of them is Merced, that they will not be moving forward. The 3 other districts will not be moving forward as well. So if in fact it is a precedent on this unfunded list, there will be very few projects that would be affected by this.
Go ahead, Barbara.
We are aware of one other district that may be in this similar situation.
Yeah, and I really think we can't speak for the other districts about whether they're going to appeal. There hasn't been an administrative action yet, and we don't know whether or not they will, in fact, appeal the decision. So I think, for me, I think the issue is we have the set of rules. It becomes a problem because we're out of bond authority. But the rules are the rules that have been in place the entire time, and I just can't see. I don't feel like there's a programmatic justification to divert from that now. So, yes, go ahead.
Question two. We haven't heard from council. Do we have the authority to change this or not?
This is really a regulatory issue, and that's in the regulation. It says that there's the term approved application, which Ms. Kampminer discussed earlier. And approved application includes everything that OPSC requires, everything including DSA certification approval would constitute an approved application. In this case where the application expired, the DSA approval expired, that would also, that becomes then an invalid application. So this is where the problem is. So if we approve the request, we are then may not be complying with that regulation that we have.
Okay.
Can I just
Yes,
a quick
go
question
ahead.
to clarify? We have addressed several issues with applications in the past, dealing with some of the requirements of existing statute. And some of those created regulations. And there's no question about it that I think that the district has come forward hat in hand, letting us know that they made a mistake. And other districts have come forward claiming the same things, and obviously contrary to regulations. And we have created circumstances like with LCPs where there's like a reduction or a grant for that particular project. And I think that was created sort of as a new rule, which is some of the concerns I think that some of my other board members share. But how is that different from this particular situation?
Well, where we create a new rule that's not a regulation, we're actually, you can say it's board discretion. Sometimes some of the regulations may have board discretion, but in this case, if you create a new rule that's not a regulation, it might become underground regulation. That's really the fear that I have.
Okay.
I think the difference being, because we've been through a number of these things now, is when it's like black and white, it's hard for us to flip because it's already written out. When there's not, that situation is not addressed in their regulations, that's when you kind of make things up as we go because they weren't thought of. They weren't addressed when they actually did the regs. And I think that was the difference between the stuff, some appeals in the past. In other words, we approved because we did not have a reg prohibiting us to do it. And then others where we have denied because there has been actually written language that says this is the way it's supposed to work, black and white type of thing. And that's what I was trying to determine, is this a black and white type one, or is this the one in the middle where there's some movability? That's what I was trying to figure out. But if it's basically the plans are not approved at this point, it is making a new thing where you could basically, technically, even though it's kind of silly from the outside looking in, but technically now you're switching from the bottom list to the top of the list, and you're making that new interpretation of the rules that you could do that if they previously applied.
Jeanette, I think there's no question that if we approved the appeal, we would be setting aside the regulation. And the question then would be, does the board have the authority to do that? If we don't have the authority to do that, I don't know why there's an item on the agenda. I think we do. I think that's what we've done in granting other appeals. So I think the legal question then becomes, are we taking a risk in using our discretion to set aside the regulation and take some action that maybe hurts someone else downstream? That's what we would be doing.
That will be what will happen. And I would urge the board, if you do decide to grant the request, to make it so narrow that it doesn't become presidential.
Okay. Well, we have a motion and a second on the floor, so I think we should go ahead and call the roll.
Senator Hancock? Senator Liu? Assemblymember Buchanan? Assemblymember Hagman? Assemblymember Nazarian?
Aye.
Esteban Almanza?
No.
Jeannie Oropeza?
Aye.
Cesar Diaz?
Aye.
Irina Ortega?
No. So there are 5 votes for the appeal, and I will leave the roll open until the close of the meeting. And I don't know if Senator Fuller's actually in the building. She's obviously not here, but so.
They were having a Republican caucus, which is the only reason we could come.
Are they still in caucus?
I
don't know. We're just
Yeah.
Okay. If we could move on to the next item that Senator Hancock would greatly appreciate for us to move to since she's here for possibly a limited time. That's tab number 12, the program status update.
So we wanted to bring forward a report that provides an update on where we're standing at with the current programs, the Career Technical Education Program, the High Performance Incentive Grant Program, the Overcrowded Relief Grant Program, and the Seismic Mitigation Program. And the report does highlight 2 things. It gives a status up report and an update on where we're at with the bond authority. And it also addresses the workload that we do have in-house and the processing that we are doing and what lists these folks may be on. The other part of the report does address, which was an item that was requested, was where the status of some of these projects related to the Seismic Mitigation Program and where they're at through the chain with the Division of State Architects. So that's the latter half of the report. The first item on page 26 is an update on the Career Technical Education. Right now, we actually are processing a number of items in the consent agenda that actually relates to 5 projects for $3.5 million. That, in effect, will leave a 0 balance for the Career Technical Education Program. Whether or not we have projects on the unfunded list, there's no projects currently on the unfunded list. Applications beyond authority list, there's currently no projects on that list as well. The board did keep open a third funding cycle on May 2, 2011, and so there's currently projects of $71.7 million that the board wanted to keep open and activate those projects as bond authority becomes available. So that's an update on Career Tech. As far as the High Performance Incentive Grant Program, wanted to highlight there's 261 projects that were processed over the last several years. We currently are processing one application in the consent agenda for a High Performance Incentive Grant related to an Overcrowded Relief Grant Program project, and there will be $32.9 million remaining in bond authority in that program area. There are several projects on the lack of authority list that have a component of a high performance incentive grant. Those projects on that list currently are the new construction and modernization program, where we don't have current bond authority to fund those projects. And again, those are applications that received prior to November 1st. Applications received subsequent to November 1st, we didn't have the authority. The board provided the regulation not to process those applications, and so we have an acknowledged list. We have several projects on that acknowledged list that are currently requesting a high performance incentive grant, and that's $6.7 million. In our current workload of processing applications to a future board meeting, we have 0 currently in our workload in the high performance incentive grant area. The next item is the Overcrowded Relief Grant Program. Wanted to highlight there is one item in the consent agenda for $1.9 million. We will have $18.9 million left in that program. There is an appeal, the district, with that particular application, an issue that we can't get resolved, and so we are elevating that item next month to the appeal, and it's about $3 million, slightly over $3 million, and so if the board does grant the appeal, there will be about $15 million left in the Overcrowded Relief Grant Program. In the last funding cycle, the 12th funding cycle, the board did approve back in November. There was a number of projects that we had moved forward, and at the time, with the limited bond authority, we couldn't process any additional applications. There has been reversions of bond authority coming back to the Overcrowded Relief Grant Program. That current cycle is, we still have applications in-house. We don't currently have a structure or regulation in place to process any additional applications, so we will have to be bringing an item back to the board to figure out whether or not we are going to create a process to continue to go down the list with the existing bond authority or open up a new filing round. And that's an update on the Overcrowded Relief Grant Program. And as far as the Seismic Mitigation Program, although there has been much change in the regulation as effective 2011, September 2011, as a result of the State Allocation Board meeting, created a seismic subcommittee. And so that subcommittee came up with some drastic changes, big changes to incentivize folks to come in the program, actually expanding the Type 2 buildings. Before there was a limited number of facilities that could qualify. They expanded to include all Type 2 facilities, eliminated the ground shaking intensity, which is a pretty hard threshold to reach, and they eliminated that change as well. It created additional opportunities for those folks that have structural deficiencies that may result in faulting, liquefaction, and landslide, and other geohazards to also come into the program. There are a couple other points as well. Since that change in the regulation, we have processed 17 applications for funding for over $33 million. Although prior to that change, there was only 3 applications that came through because of the restrictions in the program, and so a complement of only $4.7 million that were processed prior to that change. We do want to acknowledge that there's also several projects that we are processing, $2.6 million that are moving forward in this month's agenda. Also, we have $17.7 million in funding applications that we have currently in our workload, and we will be processing those items in June and July as well. So collectively, with just the action and consent agenda, there will be $148 million left. And again, the $17.7 million represents projects that are currently going through our review, and we'll be bringing those forward to a future board. I also want to acknowledge there's several projects that came in for conceptual approval. That necessarily doesn't provide bond authority to those folks, but there's about $45 million of projects that did receive a conceptual approval from the board. So that's the program update related to the seismic program. I wanted to give also share some statuses of the eligible buildings that are going through the review process at the Division of State Architect. Again, this is information that's being shared by that section division. On page 188A, we wanted to emphasize some of the workload that DSA currently is in the review status, and the other projects that are actually going through. DSA is waiting for information to be submitted to them so they can make some additional progressions and move on to the various approval stages. So the step one is basically districts are coming in to get their buildings evaluated, and that evaluation is just a quick light switch test to see whether or not they are eligible for the seismic mitigation program. So there's currently 152 projects, or buildings, excuse me, that actually have that eligibility check. 10 are currently moving through DSA. There's still 142 projects that technically don't have additional information to, in order for DSA to process those buildings evaluations along. So those currently are in the pending status, waiting for districts to communicate back to DSA to move those projects along. In step two, we wanted to highlight there's several projects there in that category. And again, it's the evaluation of whether or not the buildings will qualify for rehabilitation or replacement. And there's 23 projects or buildings that are actively moving along. And so 34 projects, or 34 buildings, I apologize, are still waiting for communication to come back from the districts so they can progress along as well with DSA. DSA currently has, on the last stage, step 3, is the final approval status, and there's 5 buildings currently going through the final approval status at DSA. So that's the highlight of the report.
Okay. Any questions?
Thank you. We just learned that we're now out of caucus, so we're going to have to unfortunately go back down.
Okay.
I did have a motion that I wanted to make, and I want to thank the staff for the information they gave us just now. It's very helpful to begin to piece things together. As board members know, I've been very interested in some of these special funds because we had such trouble getting them out. We managed to change some of the regulations to make it easier, but kind of just as we reached the end of the bond authority. I'm very pleased that the CTE money will all be spent. The high performance incentives grants, I realize that very, very difficult for us to get that money out. I'm expecting that it will probably be swept. My hope would be, quite honestly, that we could use that money for projects that would qualify for high performance schools that are on the waiting list now as unfunded projects. But I am very concerned today about the seismic money because it is so essential for the districts that have gone to the trouble to assess their seismic risk and get approved projects before us. And you know, we have a very complicated process. As staff indicated, it takes 3 separate applications to get seismic money appropriated by the board. You have to, number 1, be declared eligible. Number 2, then you do preliminary drawings to figure out if it's either replace or rehab. And then, once that gets approved, you have to submit another application with final plans. So we do have, in addition to the unfunded list, we do have applications that have conceptual approval. Now, that means they've gone through each one of these 3 steps, and they've done a lot of work, and they've got it in. And I am wondering if we could ask the OPSC staff to report on the applications that have conceptual approval and give the board options so that we, and declaring our intent would be to reserve or set aside the funds to cover the costs of those projects, because these are people who did everything they needed to do. And the second part of the motion would be to, if they could talk with the districts that have applications in and that are waiting for DSA approval, but we haven't heard back from them. If we could just survey them as to what the barriers are to them completing their applications in a timely way. Is it that they get discouraged? Is it that there's too many hurdles and they don't have time? We know that we have a complex process. And as we gear up for another bond, I think we're going to want to find ways to streamline this and use the lessons learned. So I would make that as a motion.
I was going to say, I'm not sure we need a motion. I think we need, this is a tough, I think we just need to direct staff to come back with a report that would give us more detail on the projects that are out there, because I agree with you when I think with what you're trying to achieve, and that is for projects that are going through the process that we've set up and incurring their own money doing that. We don't want to pull the rug out from under them and say, okay, you did what we asked you to do. You spent your own money doing it, and now we're going to take away the money for the program. You want to be sure it's there. But I don't know, do we need a motion to, or do we just need direction to ask staff to come back to us with that information, in terms of updating us on the projects that are listed here, whether or not it looks like they're going to go forward or not?
Well, I would, I would hope that we could do it as a motion so that staff, so it wouldn't be just a fishing expedition for staff, but that they really could come back in the next month or so and tell us if, with some options, so that we could take those conceptual approvals and get that money out the door.
So you're asking for an action item on the agenda where we could then would have that information and could then reserve authority. I don't know.
Do we have the authority to encumber funds without an application?
No, we have.
No, currently in the process, we don't have regulations, and that's the issue the Seismic Subcommittee had discussed about reserving bond authority, and that would require a regulation change. And that was something that it was discussed at great length, and at the time, the board didn't want to commit to reserving bond authority for projects that had a conceptual approval.
But even that reservation required a budget act, didn't it?
No, the regulation.
Can I reverse it? Right now, we have money sitting in Seismic. By bond, so it's there. The only way it wouldn't be there is if we take action not to have it there, correct? So, yeah, the legislature takes action, so hopefully us representing that and hopefully send a message to the governor's office. We would like to keep that there because we do have projects in the hopper and not get it swept. Right now it is technically reserved for that type of application. Whoever's first in line, the first one that submits everything, there's money there. So unless we take a legislative action to take that money away, it's going to be there. So I think if that happens, what we do here anyway doesn't really matter, because if the law trumps what we do as administrative body, it's going to trump it anyway. So I'm with you, Senator. I want to see these projects follow through. I want to make sure the money's there for them if they need them. We can only push them so far. If we need to do more rules or whatever changes, but if they, it's a built-in. You have to admit there's a problem in order to get this money. And if you admit you have a problem, that means you're going to have to spend your own money doing it. And I think that's the bigger hurdle that you can't force them to do. So because they don't want to say, we built this big building on top of a fault way back when and we're in trouble. So I think that's a bigger hurdle you're going to have to face. But that's not something we could do out here. But right now, all that money is reserved for them. I would like to see them get it as well. And I would hopefully, not that the rest of the two Republicans have much say in this budget process, but hopefully encourage them not to strip that money away, because it is very unique and is for something that eventually will be used up. But
yeah, I just wanted to highlight that, since the regulation change in 2011, there's been 66 outreach opportunities, webinars, and what have you, communicating to districts on how to access the program. We have done, individual walkthroughs in some of the projects, also along with the Division State Architect, to at least try to find ways that encourage district to apply for the program funds. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Okay.
And could I ask staff to go back and look, because prior to the creation of a seismic set-aside, districts could come in under facilities hardship, under new construction or modernization, and I think that was a much more simpler, straightforward process for districts. They'd get put in the front of the line because it was a facilities hardship. So if we could go back and look at how many districts access the money that way, and was it a better option than creating all these other loopholes and processes that delay the districts getting their money quicker, especially when they need to address a problem?
That's one of the proposals that we had in the bonds and the subcommittee that we looked at, was eliminating the special programs like that and rolling it in so it would just be eligible under new construction or modernization, because if you have to replace a facility, there shouldn't be a separate pot.
Right, but right now we have these projects that do have conceptual approval. They've given us 3 different applications. We've approved them. And there should be a way, it seems to me, while there's money in the fund, for us to get that money out to them for that.
So, Senator, you're trying to avoid it being swept, which is legislative action. Member Hagman is explaining that it stays in with seismic, absent legislative action. But are you also trying to determine the magnitude of exactly what has already been I don't want to say committed, but exactly what the potential participation level is going to be based on those districts that have expressed interest? Is that
right? And then if there are any ways that we can remove barriers so that we can ensure that those that have submitted their 3 different applications and gotten conceptual approval, so they're out there, could draw money from the fund, because it's there for that purpose. It was set aside by the voters for that purpose. And if there's money left at the end, then that will be as part of the budget process and can be swept into.
So in terms of your requested information, I'm not sure if we're talking about an information request. I don't think you need a motion at all, and the staff can bring back whatever you ask.
Options.
If you're looking to do anything that has to do with reserving funds or preempting something that could happen in the budget process, I would not support that as a motion, because I think the most important thing is that we not have that. I will acknowledge that you're raising very important questions that need to be considered, but I don't think that this body is the right body to make those choices today. So I think we have to leave that to the budget process and to the legislature as it's deliberating on what the budget's going to look like, because right now there is a budget proposal to consolidate those funds. And so if we take an action here that somehow that preempts them from being able to have that discussion, I don't think that's appropriate.
I don't think we have the authority.
Well, right. I mean, actually, this is going to go to conference. The Senate said that the money should not be swept until next July. The Assembly, I believe, said that that should not happen until January. So the question is whether we, as an administrative body, do feel that we owe something to those districts that have conceptual approval because they jumped through the hoops.
I think the information and the timing for which the information is needed to make that decision is much shorter than the time frame for our next meeting. So I think what would be more appropriate is for the administration and the staff of the board to commit to working with the budget committees to get that information as part of that dialogue. Because if we come back to have this discussion at the end of June, I don't think that's going to be timely. So, and I think, our budget staff and Lisa and her folks have been working on answering some of those questions.
Yeah, a lot of the information has been requested through some of the budget consultants, independent of the board. So, which DSA actually did show and display a number of these districts that are working through and the various stages they're at and what information they need to turn their project around. So, again, that information has been shared independently of the board.
Okay. So, Senator Hancock, you made a motion. I will.
Yeah. What?
I don't know if you.
What was the motion?
Well,
So, yeah, I don't know if you want to maintain that motion or you want to allow this process to be worked out through the budget process, or.
I think you got a message from the right person over here already.
Well, I think it would be useful to have options, but I hear what you're saying. You'd rather not have the motion. So I can,
Do we want additional information from staff?
I think maybe what we should do.
I would like
maybe what we
information on
should
the
do is
conceptually approved schools.
we
and
should
what
plan
they
to have
need.
an agenda item for the next meeting on this issue, and as the materials are developed, we'll see how the budget discussion may have progressed by then as well, and then we can have another discussion. And
Because part of what would have been the motion was asking staff to identify options for the board. So in the event the money will be swept next July or in January, if there are barriers that we could remove administratively
In the
to
interim.
get the money to the people who've taken the trouble to go through 3 applications and get conceptual approval, that it should result in things getting done in an expedited way and a good result for our school children.
I think we can address that without a motion. I think I understand where you're coming from on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. We have one item that has, still has a open roll, so if you could call the absent member.
Senator Fuller, how do you vote on Merced County Office of Education? Aye. Thank you. Motion carries.
Okay, so now we're going to go back to the I think we've acted on all the action items. So,
I know the two that want to add on.
yes, feel free. So we'll move back to the executive officer report.
So we have 3 items to share tonight, and the items that really quickly is we wanted to update the board on the apportionments that we provided in April. So clearly over $372 million were awarded in projects. And so far, as of last Friday, we received close to $92 million in fund requests. So just to remind those folks that have active apportionments that we have a July 7th deadline, so it's really critical for you to submit the documentation so we can award your money. And those projects that don't meet those timelines, they also may be in a position where they may hit the 2 strikes rule. And again, just to highlight, those projects need to move forward. Second update is provide the board is that we currently have a priority funding filing cycle, and that began May 14th and it will close June 12th. So there's currently over $217 million in projects that currently have bond authority assigned, which that means they have an unfunded approval. And so those projects will be eligible, as well as projects going through the consent agenda tonight. And again, we would like to encourage those folks to have that opportunity to submit a certification. And as we started receiving certifications over a weekly basis, we do post those certifications online. And so again, just highlight that we have a June 12th deadline. The last item is remind folks that we have a charter filing round that opened up April 1st. It closes on Friday. And we currently have, as of last Friday, 23 applications for over $186 million. And we currently understand there's additional applications that are working through the door as we speak. So again, those opportunities are there to submit a charter application. And so that means that we currently in the status have more projects and funding requests than we do bond authority. So just want to highlight those items. There's no questions?
Seeing none? Status of funds?
Okay, financial reports, just on the fund release data, again, it's just sharing with the board how fast we're liquidating the cash. On page 70, although we did award apportionments in the early part of the month, this just reflects the few weeks of activity in the end of April. So we had released $22.3 million in cash as a result of that recent apportionment. And that's a highlight we want to share in that report. The next report we wanted to share on page 74, which is the status of funds. Wanted to highlight a couple things. We are, again, the board did consent the approvals for the month of $6.5 million that went through the consent agenda, and that represents 9 projects. A bulk of those projects were going through Proposition 1D. And so 9 projects went through. Likewise, there has been rescissions that we also wanted to highlight. Currently, there's 10 projects that had rescissions, and $1.4 million came back to the program. And another item just to highlight, so we didn't migrate any additional projects through converting projects from the current true unfunded list. There's no activity in that area. But on page 84, we wanted to highlight as part of the agenda is the fund recoveries. And again, keeping track of the funds that are coming back to the program and our ability to convert those funds to remove projects over to a future consent agenda is what we want to highlight. So for the month of March, collectively, nearly $6.2 million in fund recoveries have come back as a result of rescissions. And they may have not meet the timelines. And again, we'll be providing those updates when projects don't meet the timelines. We'll be effectively showing those items here and also on the status of funds. So that's what we have to share.
And is that all we have?
One more item, joint use. We have the joint use report. Just to provide the board an update, there was June 2012, there were several projects that were provided cash as a result of joint use applications, and as a result, we still have one project that still needs to come in, and they have a December 19th deadline, and so we just wanted to highlight that there's still one outstanding project. Okay. And with that, I can open up to the workload reports.
Yep.
And so we have a workload to share that we do plan to have a June meeting to bring additional projects forward, and that's all we have.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Any comments from the public? Okay. Seeing none, we'll be adjourned.